And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark for part 2 of our interview on the Catholic Advantage with Bill Donohue. And it's why health, happiness, and heaven await the faithful. I was enjoying our conversation so much last week, and there's so much material in this book. Of course, being a sociologist yourself, there's all this data in here. That's why when you were on with Father Bitch, it was so good, because both of you are into data and understanding what's behind the information and going behind what people generally know. So
let me
this
just
book,
say
The
one
Catholic
thing,
Advantage. Go
quick
ahead.
on that.
Yeah.
The reason I put the data in there, I don't want someone saying, well, Bill Donohue, this is his opinion.
Right.
I'm not writing an essay. I've got the facts. All right. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical of some people when they just tell me, well, this is so and so and so and so. Give me the information. No one can say I made this stuff up, and I'm using some of the best sources in the sciences, both the behavioral sciences, economic sciences. I'm looking heavily into what physicians have done. So the reason I wanted to put it that way, people just can't dismiss it and say, well, that's your Catholic perspective.
Well, it's interesting because I figured somebody would say, well, you've got all these conservative kind of think tank types and stuff like Dr. Drew Pinsky, better known from, I guess, his days on MTV.
Right.
He talks about studying hundreds of celebrities and found that the most common and destructive trait was narcissism. Yeah. Reality TV stars are the most narcissistic. You would think they'd have the least to be narcissistic about.
Yeah, you would think so from a rational point of view, but we live in the selfies type society, don't we? And that's why, I mean, I'll give you one little anecdote. I take the Long Island Railroad to work. Now, when I was a kid, nobody on the train wasn't reading a book or a newspaper. Now, nobody reads anymore. Mm-hmm. They got their gadgets. Right. And they're not just, getting news. They're talking to their friends and gossiping and photos and whatnot. We've had an explosion in knowledge, and people know less now than they did before. It's all collapsed. This is because of the narcissism of our age. I mean, people are satisfied to get world news in a paragraph. There used to be a time when you wanted to read a book on it or several articles. And I'm very disturbed about the direction of where we're going on this, particularly, quite frankly, young people. Right,
especially, it just seems to be, whether it's a Sesame Street generation or whatever, this attention span, which constantly needs to be input. We had the ADD generation is where we are. So it's interesting, too, you say that, you say here about, according to Pinsky and Young, MPD is associated with an exaggerated sense of self-importance, a preoccupation with fantasy and limited success, a strong belief that I am special. Now, as a Christian, aren't we told that we're special? Why is there a difference?
Well, there's a profound difference. I mean, as a Christian, of course we're told we're special. That's that God loves all of us equally, independent of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, anything. We are all equal in the eyes of God. What we do behaviorally, that might be a different kind of thing, and we can all sin. But we're special because God loves all of us in a special way. The idea that I am special because I'm the only thing that matters on this planet, and that nobody else matters, and all I'm looking for is adulation from you. I just want you to just heap praise on me because I'm special. That's a perversion of a Christian idea.
Mm-hmm. Now, it says here, too, that Pinsky and Young said the behavior of today's celebrities is much more dramatically dysfunctional than it was a decade ago. Why do you think that's true?
Well, because I think radical individualism is taken to new heights. I would say the radical individualism of our age began in the 1960s. It's only gotten much worse, partly because of technology, partly because of dysfunctional families, and partly because of just the celebration. I mean, you take a look at the newspapers anymore. If you take out the sports, the entertainment, and celebrities, there's nothing much left. People want to have a good time. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with having a good time, but the entire focus is on what I can do to make myself happy tomorrow. This entire preoccupation with the self. It leads to self-indulgence, and that leads to recklessness for the individual and for the society as a whole.
Now, you say secularists tend to see boundaries as limiting agents, which is why alcohol and drug abuse, sexual promiscuity, and crime are more common among non-believers, which you kind of alluded to in our last program. But, people would say, well, there's plenty of stories we get about priests and other people, and good people who are good Christians who've done all these terrible things. Is that really fair?
If every single person of the clergy, every single person who says they're a practicing Catholic, who did something wrong to another individual, let's say sexual abuse, every one of them did so in open defiance of the teachings of the Catholic Church. If the teachings themselves were the cause of the problem, then we'd have a serious, serious issue. There's nothing wrong with the teachings. The teachings do not give any kind of even lip service to these kinds of notions. Now, the fact that people fail, all of us fail, there's nothing new about that. But people are mistaking, and what I get a kick out of is this. The people where Hollywood, where they celebrate sexual promiscuity, they think it's a virtue. They're the first ones to point the fingers if they find a very small percentage of priests, who, by the way, that problem was in the 60s, 70s, and the early 80s. Right. That problem almost never exists today. They like to bring it up, and the Bill Maher's of the world bring it up every Friday night on HBO.
It seems to be.
Yeah, because they want to say, listen, you have no moral authority. No. We have the moral authority to cite the teachings. If some of the teachers have failed, that's a tragedy. But there's a difference between a teacher who failed and the teachings that failed.
And if they don't agree with it, why do they care what we say?
Oh, because they know that, look, you've got the secular ideas of, make up your own ideas of right and wrong on the fly. I'll develop my own moral compass. Then you've got the Judeo-Christian ethos. Orthodox Jews are with us, but they're too small to count. Evangelicals are with us, but they're somewhat dispersed. We're around for 2,000 years. We're hierarchical. We've got rich teachings. We've got a tradition. We have a pope at the top. We're a big fat target. I understand it sociologically, but that's not justification. The idea is this. If you can attenuate and weaken the moral voice of the Catholic Church, then they get their way, which is everybody's allowed to do whatever they want to do. That's not the kind of society of license that I want to live in.
Now, one of the things we're dealing with here a lot has to do with the medical profession and, right to die, all this kind of stuff. And you quote Dr. Aaron Kerrity, Catholic psychiatrist, who actually, we recently did an interview with him. He traces much of the anti-religious bias in the health profession to Freud.
Right. I think that's true.
But hasn't Freud, very few even psychiatrists practice Freudian psychology, do they anymore?
No, but if you take a look at where the whole attack from psychiatry came, on the Judeo-Christian ethos, it began with Freud. He was very, very strong. He hated the Catholic Church precisely because it talked about restraints. He wrote a book called Civilization and Its Discontents. The only way you have a civilization is if people put restraint on them. Freud got the whole thing wrong, but this is not surprising.
Right. One of the things, too, that you talk about the power of prayer here and the controversial aspect of prayer and whether it actually helps people. There was a study that showed that patients who were prayed for improved better than those patients with the same condition who did not have anyone pray for them. How do they explain that?
This is amazing.
They just ignore that?
Well, they have to ignore it. These are called the double-blind studies. You're asked to pray for somebody. He doesn't know that you're praying for him. Those people do better suffering from the same malady as the ones who are not being prayed for. There's so much out there, and there are some pretty good people like Dr. Jeff Levin and others who admit, there's a bias, particularly in the physical science, particularly among psychiatrists. They refuse to come to grips with this stuff. Now, it's interesting. A lot of the medical schools are now taking a softer approach on religion. Now, sometimes it's a little bit patronizing, but they understand that the power of prayer is there. They can't explain it because they have to see something. Maybe they've seen electricity. I don't know. I've never seen it. I believe in it.
There you go. You talk about the fact that religion and well-being, everyone wants to be physically healthy, but not everyone wants to do what is necessary to achieve that state. And again, we talked in the last show about the idea that everybody seems to understand that you're supposed to have rules and regulations about your diet, what you can do and not. But somehow when it comes to these kind of moral laws, everybody acts like they shouldn't exist.
It's amazing. Everybody wants the same properties. We want what's called social capital. We want people to have a good work ethic. We want people to be bright and to get educated. But that doesn't just happen by whim or by fiat. It takes work. In fact, at the end of the book, I talk about this couple from Yale. Very interesting. Who are the people who are a success in our society? There are people who could put a brace on their impulses. And it's interesting. You take a look at Asian Americans, particularly the Chinese. Why do they do so well in our society? Well, here's a different kind of question. Why do so many Chinese parents insist that their children learn the violin? They do so because it means discipline. Now, you do that in the average Irish family or in some other families. I don't know if you're going to get that quite thing. The idea is you've got to practice restraint. You got to practice discipline because that will allow you then to develop your resources. And if you develop your resources, your God-given potential, that's how you become free. But see, that's counterintuitive because our society says, no, you're free by saying do whatever you want to do.
And it's also very now-oriented. So there's the immediate gratification rather than the idea that let's say, our parents would have had. I lived through the Depression. We have to save for the future. We have to make sure we're okay, as opposed to this idea that unless I'm getting what I want right now, I don't feel as if anything's worth it.
Listen, not too long ago, we had Lent, right?
Right.
What self-denial? That's probably the most heretical idea in our society. Self-denial. Why would I want to deny myself of anything? We celebrate self-indulgence. Well, if you don't practice self-denial, how are you going to practice selflessness? And selflessness is actually a virtue to service other people. So there is a connection here again. That's why we're the ones who are free. The practicing Catholics have the bonds. We respect the boundaries. We've got the belief system. You want to throw it off? Go ahead. I can't tell you what to do. But don't come crying. You're going to see the results. The results is a bad mental state, a bad physical state, an unhappy person, and these are not the people likely to get to heaven because they give only to themselves. They don't give to anybody else.
But isn't the problem with that no one's ultimately responsible for their own actions anymore?
Well, that's exactly the lack of accountability in our society, which we see it, we see it beginning in kindergarten, right through our society. You see it in the workplace as well. I'm stunned sometimes, and I read in the newspapers that incredible crimes, and there's no punishment whatsoever. Or what we have in New York City, we have a mayor who says that we have too many non-whites, African Americans, and Latinos who are being disciplined in the schools. Well, what are we going to do now? Going to start getting some of these Italians or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese kids don't get arrested too often. What are we going to do? Going to make a quota system on that? Why don't you deal with the problem, which is the family? Mm-hmm. It's always the family when it comes down to incivility. They don't want to deal with it.
One of the things you say here, atheists pride themselves on being logical and rational, but then you say, but are they? So I'm assuming you don't think so.
If you were logical and rational, you would look at evidence. You would look at the empirical data. You would come to conclusions based on science. You wouldn't just be making decisions based on emotion. Their ideology is what rules all the time. It's all a matter of empathy. And there's nothing wrong with empathy, don't get me wrong. But if you're voting for somebody, for example, because seems like a nice person, mm-hmm. I mean, that's not a civic duty. You should vote for somebody based on what you would consider the best ideas to put into public policy. But the society has gotten very soft on that. It's a big emotional massage is what we're looking for.
And as you point out here, never before in American history have more young people been bombarded with more sexually explicit material, from TV and the theater to commercials to the internet. It's impossible to escape it. We're not talking about sexual titillation, which we go back a few years. We're talking about the full-scale eroticization of our culture.
I mean, people have to ask this question. While it's true that we've made some progress in terms of out-of-wedlock births and STDs, we still lead the world in most of these categories. The people most likely to have children out of wedlock, and the people to father them as well, and the people to wind up with the STDs, are the people who don't put the brakes that God gave on us. Now, this is just simply a matter of fact. Back in the 1950s, abortion didn't exist legally. There was no sex education in the schools to think about, and the birth control didn't exist. It didn't come on the market commercially until 1960. Back then, without sex education, without the birth control, without abortion, we didn't have these problems. Mm-hmm. Now, how come we've always been told that if you want to cut down on illegitimacy and STDs, you have to have sex education, you have to more frequency use of contraception and abortion on demand? How's that worked out? We've had everything that they've asked us, the secularists, and every time they say, well, we didn't have enough contraception.
That's what it always is. It's always just we didn't drink enough poison.
So they give them enough, they give them away contraception free in New York City on any street corner. Bloomberg gave out millions and millions of condoms. Unless people put the brakes on themselves. I remember debating a doctor, a physician, on the Today Show a number of years ago, and he was saying, well, the problem with that argument, Bill, is that the young people don't follow the steps for the proper use of condom use. I said, now let's see now. So your idea as a clinician is the laboratory, okay? And if you go through the 15 steps, I mean, the 15 steps include make sure you don't cut your nails the night before you might poke a hole in the condom. You're dealing with guys who are 15 years of age who are totally irresponsible. Don't you understand that the real test is the backseat of the Chevy? It's not the clinician. Unless the kid puts the brakes on him that God gave him, we're not going to change this. Oh, you're asking us to exercise self-restraint. Yeah, I am asking you to exercise
isn't that also
self-restraint.
because they believe that that basically many of them, that we're just like Rousseau would say, just really the noble savage. We're animals. We really can't control ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And so as I'll say it again, look, you have two choices in society. Either people police themselves or the police will do the job for you. Now, if a free society is based in terms of self-governing people creating self-government, you don't live in a free society if the government's coming down on your head all the time and the police have to do nothing but roundups, because that means civilization's broken down.
Right.
So we should look at self-discipline as something which is very important. Self-discipline, all the popes understood this, self-discipline is the means toward liberation. It's not the means toward the liberticide or the end of liberty. The intellectuals have gotten it all wrong.
Well, I think you quote Adams in here in the beginning about the idea of a religious people when you have liberty and a democracy, because otherwise people don't not do things because they can't get away with it.
Right.
They don't do it because they know it's wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and we have to be told this. I mean, the most natural thing, any parent knows this. When the little kid is small, the first thing he does is he takes the food and the toys from his sibling. He has to learn to share. No kid just wakes up someday, I want to share everything I have. Right. No, he wants everything you have. So you got to teach them that. If you don't teach them that, what do we have?
Right.
And then they become adults and they're still taking from other people.
Well, they believe in original blessing. Everybody is there. It's just society that corrupts everybody.
Right.
Now, did you don't like Barbara Streisand's song, or you just would like to change the name to People Who Have People Are the Luckiest People in the World?
Yeah. It is. She says that people who have people who have people.
People who need people.
People who need people. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. It's one thing to say need people. We all need people. Having people is different altogether. And that I mean, well, I would begin with God.
Right.
That relationship, that bond is first. But you should have with your family, with your friends, with your community. If it's all about you in a self-absorbed way, the unencumbered self, I am autonomous, I make up my own rules. These people don't fare very well. They fall back on themselves. And that's where we get into the loneliness, the depression, and the suicidal tendencies.
That's the section you talk about bonds here. But you say, talking about married couples are not alone, but more than a few are lonelier than they were when they were single. Why is that?
Well, that's exactly it. Because they're staying together, that's fine. But they've gone their own ways. And oftentimes what you see in these contemporary marriages is that it's understood. Okay, I just don't get caught, don't embarrass me. But we're going to live what I call...
It's called married singles.
Yeah,
kind of a thing,
or
right?
parallel lives.
Right, yeah. Right.
But again, everything breaks down there. You've got to have some bonds. And the bonds are available in many different ways, but the idea that I don't need bonds, I am just of myself, I'm self-directing, that doesn't work out.
Right. Also here, I never promised you a rose garden. I was thinking of this, obviously, with our president, the rose garden, promising people that things are fair and stuff. And one of the things that you talk about in the book here is the Catholic idea of redemptive suffering, which goes with the idea that no one ever said that life was supposed to be idyllic or perfect, and that suffering comes into everyone's life, right? It's really how you deal with it.
The atheists hate the idea that there's evil. They hate the idea that there's suffering. They think they can get rid of all of it. And their idea of getting rid of suffering, by the way, is to kill the patient increasingly. That's called doctor-assisted suicide.
Right.
No, we had the idea of conjoining our sufferings with the Lord. That's something that can set us free. We have so many Catholic advantages over the agnostics and the atheists. I'm just using the celebrities and intellectuals as two prototypes. Right. It's amazing. The idea that you can fall back on yourself, that you're complete and whole by yourself, and you don't need anybody else. The people who are suffering from mental illness in our society, I'm not talking about the ones who may be chemically driven. A lot of it is driven because, as Paul Vitz and others have said, they have these ideas about where they should be in life and they get depressed.
And isn't that also being promoted many times by society? I mean, the idea is that not only I think this, but society's telling me yes, and constantly putting us to compare and realize how much lesser we are than what we should be. And you talk about Christianity stave off suicide. Yes, the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians all experienced decadent periods, sounds like where we are now. And it was during those times that suicide spiked. It's also true, you say, that nations that are the most secular are also most likely to have high suicide rates.
Well, take a look at our own country. In San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge is such a popular place to jump off the bridge that they put up this big safety net. Now, they don't put the safety net in Birmingham, all right? I mean, you got bridges here. You don't put up safety nets. I mean, it's a serious problem, and I'm not trying to make light of it, but I mean, if these people had something in their life other than themselves, I mean, San Francisco is known as one of the hedonistic capitals of America, and it shows up in terms of these mental maladies and physical maladies that I'm discussing.
Yeah, and certainly one would say, if one was buying the line, you would think, well, this is a great place to live. It's beautiful, and everybody's free and doing what they want, etc. You say it's natural for us to avoid suffering and seek happiness. Indeed, only masochists like to suffer. Blessed John Henry Newman noted that we're called to be saints, so we are by that very calling called to suffer, but he hastened to add that it was important not to be puffed up by our privilege of suffering, nor bring suffering needlessly upon ourselves.
Well, I think like anything else.
Because we get accused of that, we're masochistic or something.
Anytime you have something which is good, let's take discipline. It's good to discipline your child. When you take it to extremes, you pervert its essence, because now you become a tyrant, okay? There's a difference between being authoritative. A parent should be authoritative, but they shouldn't be authoritarian. There's a difference here. And that's what happens when a lot of times people get off on a purist kind of streak, and they take something good, they run it to its extremes, thinking we'll make it better. Now, I like steak, okay? If I eat too much of it, my stomach's going to turn.
Right.
People have to understand what Aquinas talked about, the mean. Everything comes back to the average.
Right.
Don't go to the extremes.
Right.
But our society, we tout extremes.
Moderation in all things.
But we don't have, our society seems to, we're touting the idea of extremism in all things. And then we wonder why we have all these problems. We say, it wasn't supposed to work out this way, because they don't understand nature and nature's God. It always goes back to human nature and to God. And if you're in rebellion against nature and God, you're going to create havoc for yourself and for others.
Well, it's interesting, too, in the Catholic vision, you mentioned Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas saw Aristotle's idea of happiness as commendable, albeit incomplete. True happiness, he counseled, could not be achieved on earth, which apparently seems to be what people think. It could be achieved only when you experience oneness with God in the hereafter. Happiness, it turns out, is highly heritable. Environment matters less. This was interesting. So it turns out that is highly heritable, meaning it's something you get from heredity. Right. And environment matters less as to whether you're happy or not.
Right.
I was surprised by that.
Well, I'm the author, and I guess you're used to asking authors, well, why is that? You know what? I don't know. I'll be the first one. I'm not going to. When I read that, the statistic is there, and I've checked it out in many different places, that there's a strong heritable genetic component to happiness. I wish I could tell you exactly why that is, but then I'd be lying to you. I just don't know. I know that's the fact.
Right.
But I don't quite understand it. You'd probably have to.
And there's another one we always hear. Does money buy happiness? No, it doesn't. We all know that idea because we can see that ourselves. We see it with famous rich people. You talk about it, Hollywood. But it's interesting, too, to realize that rich people are still generally happier than poor people in the same country. But rich countries are not necessarily happier than poor one. It also matters. You just kind of reach a threshold where your needs, I guess, are met and it doesn't matter anymore. And that's when you say what matters most, you quote here, is success and recognition.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking at the work the Israeli sociologists, Amitai Etzioni and others have looked at this. If there's two things that we all want, I mean, from the time you're born to the time you die, two things that every individual craves: affection and recognition. We can't seem to get enough affection and recognition. Now, those are things that come from others toward us. So that we're dependent on somebody else giving us the affection, somebody else giving us the recognition. Again, in terms of recognition, you can take that to extremes as well and pervert it. Like I say with Elvis, he said, I got all the recognition, I wanted it so badly, but he lost sight of everything else. Our society doesn't provide the same basis for delivering on affection and recognition that we did in the past, because we've turned inward toward ourselves, which doesn't help.
Okay, let me ask you just in the closing minutes, how long did it take you to put this book together?
I work like a dog. I'm in early at work and I go all day long. So the only time I really have to write is on Sunday afternoons and my vacations. I don't take vacation. I take a couple of days here and there. I'm a slave to it. It took me about a year and a half of research and about a year and a half of writing.
And where do you write when you're writing?
Most of the time in my office at home. I want something. I need big blocks of time uninterrupted. Occasionally I can get something done like this at work, But there's always something going on with the bigots. They keep me alive. They come into my office every 5 minutes saying, "Bill, we got to get somebody else coming after Catholics now." So it takes a tremendous amount of, can I use the word again, self-discipline.
Right.
If I didn't have the self-discipline, I could never do this book.
Okay.
In that matter, if I were a professor, I'd have all the time in the world. I was a professor, and those people they do have all the time in the world.
They
I know.
have plenty of time. They figured out how to make a commune and make a living out of it. They couldn't make it work in the
I'd
regular
rather be
world.
the president of the Catholic League, though.
There you are. Well, we're happy you are too, and we hope there's another book in you when you find some more time.
Perhaps there is.
Thank you so much. Talking with Bill Donohue, Why Catholicism Matters, an earlier book worth checking out. And also, The Catholic Advantage, Why Health, Happiness, and Heaven Await the Faithful. This is something you really should read, published by Image, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Lots of great information. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.